Somewhere between the Tigris and the Euphrates, where water mixes with earth and a tale is born from the clay, a unique city arose. A city that built its dreams from fire, its walls from gold, and its memory from clay. This is Babylon, the city that tried to touch the sky and teach the earth how to write, how to dream, and how to legislate laws. In its nights, torches were lit atop the Ziggurats, prayers ascended to the heavens, and the echoes of kings resonated in its halls. From its dust, a tower was born that sought to reach the sky, and from its hanging gardens, a legend scattered that is still told today. Between its walls, the first story of humanity was recorded, a story that continues to be written. So, what made Babylon become a symbol of immortality? And what remains of a city that was once the center of the world? Here begins the story of Babylon. Somewhere between the desert and the sea, the waters of the Tigris and the Euphrates flow like two threads of life, carving the face of the earth. When they meet, Mesopotamia is born, the region that would become the cradle of everything we call civilization today. More than 5,000 years ago, people began abandoning their nomadic lives and settling on the banks of the two rivers. There, where the land was fertile and water was plentiful, they built the first villages, planted barley and wheat, raised sheep and goats, and made their tools from stone and copper. This was the first step on a long road toward civility. With the passage of time, cities began to emerge from the heart of the clay: Eridu, Ur, Lagash, and Uruk. These names, which seem distant, were once bustling with life. In Uruk specifically, the first system of writing was born on clay tablets, and the first stories and myths were recorded. It was as if humanity suddenly discovered that it did not want to be forgotten. Then came the Akkadians from the north, a strong and warlike people. They united under a king named Sargon of Akkad in approximately the 24th century BC to establish the first known empire in history. Since that time, Mesopotamia became a permanent stage for the exchange of kingdoms. Each one rose, then fell, only for another to rise after it. But something different was brewing on the horizon. A new city began to emerge between the rivers, learning from its predecessors and combining knowledge with power. In its beginnings, Babylon was just a small city of clay, but fate was hiding a place for it in the heart of history, a place no one would rival. Mesopotamia served as the first school for humanity. Here, humans learned how to farm, how to write, and how to govern. From here came the first cities, the oldest laws, and the deepest myths. It is the place where humanity learned to raise its head to the sky and question the secret of existence. While the sands covered the ruins of old cities, Babylon opened its eyes for the first time, like a new daughter of a long history of clay, water, and fire. And so, from the ruins of ancient cities and the ashes of passing empires, Babylon rose to become the beating heart of Mesopotamia and the city the world would talk about for thousands of years. In the heart of Mesopotamia, between two paths of water and clay, Babylon was still just a small village. But the two rivers washed its face every day, planting seeds in its soil for a dream larger than the space it occupied. The story began in the 19th century BC when people chose it to be a transit point between north and south, a meeting point for caravans coming from older cities to trade, exchange news, and goods. Its location, almost in the middle of the path between the Tigris and the Euphrates, was a place that could neither be bypassed nor forgotten. Slowly, the village turned into a town, and the town into a city, surrounded by clay walls. People built their homes from bricks and adorned their entrances with small statues to ward off evil, inscribing symbols on their walls that glorified the ancient gods. At night, when everyone slept, flames would ignite in the temples, signaling that something great was coming. The city was named Babili, Gate of God, as if it were truly a gate connecting earth to heaven. With the passage of time, the pronunciation changed to Babylon, and this name would become one of the most resonant in history. The city grew under the shadow of contending kingdoms, the Assyrians in the north, and the Sumerians and Chaldeans in the south. But Babylon was different. It did not build its glory with swords initially, but with markets, mines, and order. From its very start, it knew that strength lay not just in war, but in organization, writing, and law. In its first streets, cuneiform writing was inscribed on tablets, recording commercial transactions, taxes, and covenants between merchants and farmers. Those small lines were the first pulse of a heart that would later grow and rule the surrounding land, cities, and peoples. Babylon was not born all at once. It grew like a tree, its roots in the river and its branches reaching toward the sky. It learned from the kingdoms that preceded it, then added something new that no one had done before, the desire for order, justice, and immortality. When the 18th century BC arrived, fate had chosen a man to lead it to its first glory, a man whose name would be known in every history book, Hammurabi. During the reign of this king, Babylon would transform from a rising city into the capital of the ancient world. The first law to regulate human life would be inscribed on its walls, and humanity would learn the meaning of justice for the first time. Here begins the next story, Hammurabi, the lawgiver king. When the dawn of the 18th century BC broke, Babylon had begun to establish itself among the great cities. But it needed a leader who knew how to turn power into civilization and a dream into order. Among the kings who succeeded one another, a man named Hammurabi appeared, a young king who believed that a city is built not only with stones, but with law, justice, and the word spoken to become a scale between people. When he ascended the throne in 1792 BC, his kingdom was small, surrounded by enemies on all sides. But he did not rely on war initially, but on intelligence, alliances, and patience. He sent messengers to neighboring cities to sign treaties, exchanging swords for covenants. With the passing years, Hammurabi became the strongest king in Mesopotamia. When order was established for him, he began to lay the foundations for the state he dreamed of, a state ruled by justice, not whim. In the heart of the capital, he ordered the carving of a block of black stone, over 2 meters high, on which 282 legal provisions were inscribed in a simple language that every Babylonian citizen could understand. That stone slab would later be known as the Code of Hammurabi, the oldest written law in human history. The laws were both precise and fair, regulating marriage, property, trade, and inheritance, and specifying penalties according to the crime and intent. He who steals is punished, and he who oppresses is held accountable. But it also protected the weak from the strong and prevented the judge from manipulating the verdict. At the top, there is an inscription showing Hammurabi standing before the god Shamash, the god of justice and light, as if receiving the legitimacy of rule from him in a scene that connects the earth to the sky and humanity to its destiny above. Thanks to these laws, order prevailed in Babylon, and people learned that justice has a voice and a weight that cannot be silenced. The city turned into a center for administration and learning. Judges began studying the texts of the laws in temples and schools. For the first time, authority was no longer the property of desire but belonged to the laws inscribed on the stone. Hammurabi laid the cornerstone for a state that operates by law and made Babylon a model for all who came after him. Even kings who ruled centuries later continued to look upon his name as a symbol of wisdom and discipline. When he passed away, he was not buried only as a king, but as the one who taught the world that justice can be written and remain even after kingdoms fade. With the stability of rule in Babylon, life began to pulse in its streets and alleys. Markets were bustling with people, and schools taught children the secrets of writing and arithmetic. The city filled with the sounds of artisans and musicians. In the next chapter, we will get closer to the people themselves, their daily details, their food, their clothes, and their dreams, to see what daily life was like in Babylon. With the sunrise above the walls of Babylon, the city begins to wake up to familiar sounds, doors opening, animals being led to the fields, and vendors calling out in the markets with voices echoing between the clay alleys. The Babylonian day began early, for the river waits for no one. Farmers went out to the banks of the Euphrates, carrying their wooden plows and opening small canals to irrigate the fields filled with barley, wheat, dates, and legumes. From afar, the ziggurat towers appeared, embracing the morning mist, as if watching in sacred silence. In the city, life revolved at a regulated pace. Markets were bustling with activity, displaying colorful fabrics from the east, copper from Anatolia, and perfumes and oils from the south. Merchants exchanged small silver coins or wrote their transactions on clay tablets where everything was recorded, even the price of a loaf of bread. The homes were simple, built of sun-dried clay with wooden and palm trunk roofs. They featured a small courtyard centered around a water jar, around which the family gathered at sunset to talk. In the evening, they lit oil lamps and listened to the sounds of the oud and flute drifting from a neighboring house. The women were the heart and soul of the home. They managed household affairs, prepared bread on hot clay, made perfumes from flowers, and sometimes participated with their husbands in trade, as Babylonian law granted women status and respect. The city also had small schools where children sat on the ground with clay tablets and reed pens before them. They learned to draw cuneiform symbols, repeating them dozens of times until they mastered them, for education in Babylon was not a luxury but a foundation for every profession and status in society. In the evening, the alleys filled with the scent of fresh bread and the faint sound of drums coming from the temples, announcing the start of a new ritual or celebration. Life in Babylon was not just work but a mix of effort, joy, and faith. When night fell, the torchlights reflected on the clay walls, and the murmurs and prayers of the priests echoed in the distance as people prepared for a new day of work and worship in a city that hardly slept, as if fearing to miss a moment of glory. While life revolved at its simple pace, the souls of the Babylonians were connected to the sky. Many gods ruled the rain, the sun, and war, and temples rose toward the clouds. In the next chapter, we will enter another world, the world of religion and myths, to discover how the Babylonians understood the universe, the gods, and humanity. When the sun set over Babylon behind the high towers and torches began to burn on the temple walls, the city transformed into a canvas of light and mystery. People returned to their homes, but the priests remained awake until dawn, watching the sky and writing on clay what they saw of signs in the stars. The Babylonian religion was a vast world of symbols and gods. At its peak stood the god Marduk, the god of order and creation, who fought the forces of chaos in the first myths and triumphed to make Babylon the capital of the gods. Beside him appeared Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, adorned with stars and worshipped in the great temples, where offerings of flowers, perfumes, bread, and honey were presented to her. The temples were not only places of worship but also centers of science, economy, and administration. Inside were elevated rooms designated for priests, where records, texts, and astronomical observations were kept. At the top were platforms for watching the sky, where it was believed the gods spoke through light and movement. On holy days, Babylon witnessed huge processions. People went out into the streets carrying small statues of the gods, music played, and flowers were scattered on the path leading to the great temple. The most famous of these processions was the Babylonian New Year's festival, Akitu, held at the beginning of spring and lasting 12 days, where the story of creation was reenacted, and the covenant between Marduk and his people was renewed. In the long nights, myths were told by the firelight. The most famous of these was the Epic of Gilgamesh, which preceded all later stories and myths. It tells of a king who seeks immortality on a journey filled with monsters, gods, and great questions. In it, The question that has accompanied humanity since the beginning is posed: can one overcome death? The Babylonians believed that everything has a soul and every event has a meaning in an unseen world. Rain was a gift from the god, and floods were his wrath. Sleep was a gateway between the two worlds. Therefore, they lived their lives between fear and hope, seeking the god's favor and offering sacrifices to keep Babylon protected from evil. At the top of the Ziggurat of Babylon, priests would ascend at night carrying lamps, looking at the sky, observing the movement of the planets, and believing they were reading what the future held. The Babylonian religion was a mix of science and faith, of superstition and wisdom, combining heaven and earth in one unbroken system. From those rituals and temples was born the desire for understanding, to record every star, every calculation, and every idea. For the Babylonians, religion was not a barrier to science but a driver to discover the order in the universe. In the next chapter, we will open the clay tablets to read what the early priests and scientists wrote about numbers, stars, and time. Here begins the story of writing and science in Babylon. In Babylon, the word was not only spoken but inscribed on clay. There, between the fingers of scribes smeared with dirt and water, cuneiform writing was born, the first written language in history and humanity's first attempt to save its memory from oblivion. The tablets were made of wet clay, then left to dry under the sun, turning them into documents untouched by time. On their surface, small wedge-shaped symbols were drawn, each carrying an idea, a number, or a name. Through these symbols, the Babylonians recorded their daily lives, from business contracts to religious texts, from poems to astronomical calculations. There were men known as scribes who carried their pens made of reeds and sat before piles of clay tablets. They were the scientists of their time, tracking the movement of planets and measuring time through shadows and stars. The Babylonians believed that the sky was an open book and that what was written in it was reflected in the fate of humanity. From the observation of the stars, a new science was born, Babylonian astronomy. They divided the sky into 12 signs of the zodiac, accurately monitored the moon and its phases, and created agricultural calendar tables that informed farmers of the seasons for floods and harvests. They also excelled in mathematics and used the sexagesimal, base, 60, system, upon which units of time are still based today, 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute, and the division of the circle, 360 degrees. They knew addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and calculated areas with remarkable precision for building palaces and temples. In medicine, the Babylonians mixed empirical practice with belief. Doctors collected and boiled herbs and recited incantations during treatment, believing that the body and soul were two aspects of one reality. They also recorded precise medical prescriptions that referred to eye and stomach diseases and methods of treating them with water and natural oils. As for engineering, it was the pillar upon which their civilization was built. They knew how to erect straight walls and build massive towers with amazing precision, using simple but effective tools. The Babylonians combined science and faith, observation and contemplation, making knowledge a form of worship and writing a means to immortality. Over the centuries, their sciences spread to neighboring peoples, from which the Greeks and Persians took, and which humanity as a whole later inherited. The simple clay on which they wrote was the seed that sprouted every library and every book. With the flourishing of science and writing, Babylon began to change its appearance internally. Towers rose, streets widened, and the city turned into a canvas of beauty and perfection. In the next chapter, we will raise our heads to the sky to witness how the Babylonians created wonders of stone and clay, from ziggurats to the hanging gardens that astonished the world. Here begins a new chapter, architecture and wonders. When you approach Babylon from afar, the city appears like a dream rising from the earth. Its walls of fired brick shine under the Mesopotamian sun like painted gold refined by fire. Babylonian architecture was a mix of strength and beauty, built to last and tell the story of humanity that wanted to touch the sky with its own hands. In the heart of the city rose the ziggurat, the tiered structure resembling a mountain. Its layers ascended step by step until they reached the highest temple dedicated to the god Marduk. From there, priests watched the horizon and the stars, lighting torches at night to keep the sky connected to the earth. The ziggurat was not just a building, but a symbol of humanity's relationship with the heavens, a staircase of clay ascending toward the unknown. But Babylon did not stop at the ziggurat. At a later time, specifically in the 6th century BC, the Babylonians built what would later become one of the legends of the ancient world, the Hanging Gardens. It is said that King Nebuchadnezzar II ordered its construction for his wife, who missed the mountains of her homeland. He built her a paradise, rows of stone terraces where water flowed through hidden canals from the river, with trees, palms, and flowers of colors unknown to the desert cascading down. Its site was magnificent at sunset when the sun's rays reflected on its green leaves, making the city look like a piece of paradise that had fallen to earth. The Tower of Babel was one of the most mysterious buildings in history. It is believed to be an extension of the Great Ziggurat, built to reach the heavens, perhaps exceeding 90 meters in height. Legend spoke of it as a tower through which people sought to get closer to the divine, but the wind demolished it, and languages dispersed afterward. Whether the story is a myth or a true memory, the Tower of Babel remained a symbol of unbounded human ambition. The towers were not the only remarkable feature, the city gates were works of art in themselves. The most famous was the Ishtar Gate, decorated with lapis lazuli blue brick and engraved with the figures of bulls and lions, symbols of power and protection. It was the official entrance to the city, through which grand processions passed, and visitors crossed, mesmerized by the colors, majesty, and grandeur they saw. At night, the torchlights reflected on the walls of the towers and palaces, making Babylon look like a city of fire and gold, glowing amidst the plains, as if it were a planet brought down to earth. The Babylonians created the unimaginable from clay and the miraculous from simplicity. Therefore, Babylon was not merely a city but an eternal canvas of beauty and wonder that challenged time, wind, and ruin. But behind these towers and gardens, there was another force protecting it, organized armies and kings who planned and led. Glory is not built on beauty alone, it also requires the sword and the mind together. In the next chapter, we will explore Babylon's military strength and how its kings defended the city that sought to eternalize its name. In an era when cities were vying for land and water, the beauty of Babylon alone was not enough to protect it. It had to possess a power commensurate with its greatness and have kings who knew that glory is built not only with gold but also with swords and minds. From the 18th century BC, Babylon began to form its first organized armies. They consisted of farmers, merchants, and artisans who turned into fighters when danger arose. They carried bronze shields and long spears, lining up in tight ranks, resembling a moving wall. The commanders received rigorous training in the art of war and administration. The Babylonian soldier was not an ordinary fighter but a part of a precisely disciplined military system, similar to the precision of Hammurabi's laws. Wars at that time were not just a struggle for land but a struggle for prestige and symbolism. Neighboring cities like Assyria and the Hittites were watching Babylon, and often, battles decided the fate of the entire civilization. Among the kings who stood out in Babylonian history is Nebuchadnezzar II, who ruled in the 6th century BC. He was a skilled leader who combined severity and wisdom. He led his armies westward, recovering cities that had rebelled against Babylon, subjugated Jerusalem, and brought back captives and treasures to rebuild his capital anew. But what distinguished Nebuchadnezzar was not just conquest but organization. He restructured the army to become the strongest in the region, divided into units of infantry, archers, and charioteers. He used elephants and horses in major battles and established a permanent garrison for every city to guard it from within and without. The Ishtar Gate was the entrance for the royal procession, and through it, the armies marched upon their victorious return in a magnificent scene filled with songs and where spoils were hung on the walls as symbols of greatness. Kings were given titles that glorified them: the Great King, King of the Four Quarters, titles that pointed to a dream larger than the limits of the earth. Despite the many wars they fought, their goal was not destruction but organized control that preserved stability. Every conquered land was annexed to the empire with order, not chaos, and scribes and priests were sent to record taxes and maintain laws. Babylon knew that weapons alone do not create an empire, and kings who do not think about science and administration will soon have their names lost in the dust. Thus, power in Babylon was a mind before it was a sword. While its armies filled the horizon, the city inside grew wider and richer, its walls gleaming with blue, and its towers rising higher, as if preparing for a new era of unmatched glory. With the stability of rule in Nebuchadnezzar's hands, Babylon began to enter its true golden age. Every street spoke of greatness, and every wall shone as if it were a mirror to the sky. In the next chapter, we will walk the streets of the new Babylon to see how it transformed into the gem of kingdoms and the greatest city known to ancient man. Here begins another chapter of glory, Nebuchadnezzar and the New Babylon. When Nebuchadnezzar II sat on the throne of Babylon in the 6th century BC, the city stood at a crossroads between glory and danger. But this king was unlike any other. He saw Babylon as more than just a capital. He saw it as a symbol of greatness and an eternal image of what the hand of man could achieve. His rule began with the rebuilding of everything that had been destroyed in previous wars. He raised the walls around the city, making them extend as a double belt of fired brick, over 18 kilometers long, and adorned them with high towers and massive gates. The walls were so thick that war chariots could drive on them side by side. From afar, Babylon looked like a fortress of light and colored clay. In the heart of the city rose the Ishtar Gate, one of the most beautiful creations of ancient man. Shiny blue brick like the evening sky, engraved with the figures of bulls, dragons, and lions walking in harmonious rows. Beneath it passed the royal processions, carrying banners, statues, and bronze chariots, while music resonated in the streets. That gate was a declaration of the birth of the new Babylon, a city unlike anything that came before it. Inside the walls, palaces extended over vast areas, adorned with gardens, fountains, and statues. Their walls were covered with golden inscriptions, and their ceilings reflected the sunlight like a sky. Every corner was designed to show the glory of the king and the skill of the Babylonian builders. Nebuchadnezzar was an engineer as much as he was a king. He cared for paved roads, markets, and temples, and built bridges over the river to connect the parts of the city. In his era, Babylon became a center for international trade, with goods arriving from India, Anatolia, and Egypt. Caravans passed through its gates laden with spices, ivory, copper, and silk, in a scene unmatched in any other city of that time. Politically, the king was skilled at managing alliances, forging treaties at times and showing force at others. He secured his borders and expanded his influence until Babylon became the greatest kingdom in the ancient East during his reign. It is said that in his time, the hanging gardens were rebuilt to amaze the world anew, green terraces where water cascaded from top to bottom in an ingenious engineering system relying on pumps and levers. It was the paradise the king wanted for his wife, but it became a dream that transcended love, a symbol of beauty that does not age. While the city flourished with life and light, voices echoed from the temples at night, prayers raised to the gods of Babylon to bless the king and his kingdom. People felt they were living in a golden age, a time when humanity approached the limits of perfection. But time does not stop, and even great cities know a moment of decline. On the horizon, new forces were stirring, and the world was preparing for another phase that would change everything. With the end of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, the clouds of politics and war began to gather around Babylon, weak kings, internal conflicts, and enemies approaching the walls day by day. In the next chapter, we will witness the great fall when Cyrus the Persian enters the city, and the splendor of Babylon, which illuminated the world for centuries, is extinguished. Here begins the final story, the fall of Babylon. No one in Babylon could imagine that those walls, which had resisted wars and centuries, might open one night without a single cry. But history does not knock when it comes, it enters silently. After the death of Nebuchadnezzar II in the 6th century BC, the empire began to lose its coherence. Kings succeeded rapidly, some preoccupied with palaces and celebrations, forgetting the politics that made Babylon strong. Outside, a new power was growing in influence, the Persians, led by Cyrus the Great, an ambitious king who saw Babylon as a crown that had to be seized. In 539 BC, the Persian armies moved south, advancing through the desert with precise plans and complete silence. It was not a swift campaign but a slow siege, in which Cyrus knew that the greatest cities fall from within, not from without. During that period, Babylon was immersed in internal conflicts between priests angry at King Nabonidus, an army exhausted by wars, and a populace tired of taxes and restrictions. These divisions made the high walls seem lifeless, as if they were guarding a city that no longer wanted to fight. One night, the Persians quietly diverted the course of the Euphrates River, causing the water level inside the city to drop. Through the dry canals, soldiers entered without significant fighting. People woke up in the morning to find Persian flags waving over the towers, and with that, the glory of Babylon, which had lasted for centuries, ended. Cyrus did not destroy the city, he entered it in a peaceful procession and declared his respect for its gods and temples, but he put an end to its independence forever. From that moment, Babylon transformed from a capital of civilization into a great memory and from a symbol of power into a lesson in its transience. In the ancient texts it was written that Babylon fell because of its arrogance, but the truth is deeper than that. It fell because time had changed, and no matter how great nations become, they cannot remain at the pinnacle of glory forever. Kings departed, and names changed, but their traces remained, bearing witness. One of the most wonderful stories of humanity had ended. The end was quiet, just as the sun is before sunset, beautiful, yet final. With the fall of Babylon, its name did not disappear from memory but began another chapter of its life, a chapter in which its stories and books live on as a symbol of arrogance at times, and of greatness and immortality at others. In the next chapter, we will trace its impact on human memory to see how Babylon transformed from a city on earth into an undying idea. When Babylon fell from its throne, it did not disappear from human memory. Great cities do not die when they are destroyed but when they are forgotten, and Babylon was never forgotten. In ancient books, especially the Bible, Babylon appeared as a symbol of arrogance and rebellion against the heavens. It was said to be the city whose people wanted to build a tower reaching God, so their tongues were confused, and they scattered across the earth. Since then, the name Babylon has been associated with confusion and chaos, to the extent that the word Babel is used to describe the mixing of languages and sounds. But Babylon was, in truth, more than a myth, it was a reflection of ancient human ambition and its desire to achieve perfection. For this reason, its name continued to resonate in every era. In Greek and Roman literature, writers spoke of its wealth and beauty, its great walls, and its hanging gardens, viewing it as a gateway between East and West and an inspiration for all who sought civilization. In the Middle Ages, Babylon transformed into a religious and political symbol in both Christian and Islamic texts, mentioned sometimes as a place of divine punishment and other times as a home of wisdom and knowledge. Poets made it a mirror of pride and loss, describing it as the city that wanted to ascend to the sky but returned to the dust. In modern times, the name Babylon reappeared in books, novels, and films, sometimes as a symbol of decadence and sometimes as a symbol of lost civilization. From the paintings of Gustave Doré to the works of European musicians, from films to songs, Babylon remained present, like a beautiful ghost passing through the ages, reminding humanity of its greatness and its fall at the same time. Even in the languages of nations, the word Babylon continues to refer to diversity and intermingling, as if its first spirit, the spirit of the city that gathered people from all nations, still lives in the modern world, in the great cities bustling with languages and colors. Babylon became an idea more than a place, an idea about humanity when it tries to create immortality with its own hands and when it discovers that, despite its greatness, it is still limited by time. Thus, Babylon remained in memory a dual symbol, a symbol of unforgettable greatness and of unforgivable arrogance, reminding us that civilization is like fire, it illuminates, but it may burn those who approach it too closely. Although Babylon became a memory in books and myths, its ruins still stand, stones bearing the fingerprints of ancient builders and inscriptions whispering what remains of the voice of history. In the next chapter, we will return to the present to see what remains of that city and how the legacy of Babylon is still alive in science, art, and humanity, despite the passage of thousands of years. Even though the winds have repeatedly passed over its ruins, Babylon has not disappeared. It is still there, in the stone, in the letter, and in the spirit of humanity that refuses to forget. Today, if you walk in the plains of Hilla in southern Iraq, you will see the remains of the old walls emerging from the dust like a whisper from the past, clay tablets, broken inscriptions, but still pulsating with what was written on them 4,000 years ago. There, you can touch the same clay touched by the hands of the Babylonian scribes when they inscribed the first words of humanity. Babylon left its mark on everything around us, in writing, the system of letters that evolved from their cuneiform symbols, in laws, which laid the foundations of justice, and in sciences, which the Greeks and Arabs later transmitted. Even the calendar by which we measure time today bears its imprint in the division of the hour into 60 minutes and the circle into 360 degrees. But the legacy of Babylon was not only scientific, it was also spiritual and cultural. It gave the world the idea of the integrated city, where science meets religion, and commerce meets art, and where temples are centers of learning, not just places of worship. As the world looks at its ruins today, it seems to look back at us with a silence that holds one question: have we learned from the past, or are we still building our own towers to reach the sky again? And so, between the ruins of clay and the sky of Iraq, Babylon remains a witness to the greatest things humanity has created and to its fragility at the same time. We will close the pages of the story, not to forget it, but to contemplate the meaning it left within us and to ask ourselves, what remains of civilizations after their people are gone?